you, worship team. If you have your Bible, turn with me to the book of Psalm and Psalm 52. Notice that I say Psalm because a lot of people say it's the book of Psalms. There's lots of Psalms in the book of Psalm, but it actually is singular. And it's a book of poetry and best songs that were at the time of David and the high point of Israel, that someone edited and brought all these songs, like the best of the 60s or something, together. And some of them are distinguished by saying a Psalm of David. And they minister to our souls. So those people that are into counseling or being counseled or whatever, they find a great affinity with Psalms because, the different Psalms, because it identifies with the anguish that we feel, the frustration that we feel when we feel anger towards God. He can handle it. When we feel like we're looking for the point, they're expressed in this book. And Psalm 52 actually is a pretty negative psalm. It's talking about people that are mocking you and dancing in front of your face and making fun of you. The whole passage is like that until the last verse. And so, I always remember Psalm 52 because it's next to Psalm 51, which is one of my favorite psalm of all, because it's the greatest psalm of forgiveness. And I remember that because Dick Butkus, the great football star, was number 51, right? Some of us remember Dick Butkus' number. And so Psalm 52 speaks to our frustrations as well as our faith. And I've been on a series of messages on 4 reasons to live with more trust. And this one I've entitled, Trust the Dream, because we always celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s weekend. This isn't just another 3-day weekend. His life continues to be important to us. And I've been listening all week. Since I wrote a book on Audible.com, I get free books on Audible.com. And I have the recording of all of his speeches, live speeches, that he ever gave, and I've been listening to him this whole week. So if I sound like Martin Luther King Jr. during this speech, which I doubt, it's not my fault. I've been listening to too many of his speeches. But we want to give the dream honor because he was only 39 years old when an assassin shot him as he came out of his motel room when he was protesting the garbage workers' strike to give them a better lifestyle. It wasn't a shock. It was a shock. It was a shock to all. I remember exactly where I was when it happened. But it wasn't like we knew that we were surprised that he was living on the edge, because he had many threats to his life. This young man that had his PhD in the philosophy of religion from Boston University, who was so eloquent, one of the greatest Americans to ever live, who was a follower of Jesus Christ, imperfect, but a follower of Jesus Christ, and borrowed his methodology to change the world from Jesus Christ, and Mahatma Gandhi, who borrowed his methodology from Jesus Christ. He had such courage. My dad was friends with Ralph Abernathy. He has a big picture of Martin Luther King that was given to him with a note signed by Reverend Abernathy. Those are tumultuous days. We've come a long ways. We've got a long ways to go. And so his dreams seemed very fragile. On that night when he went and he preached, and he knew how fragile his dream was. At one point when he was at a book signing in Harlem, I remember the speech afterwards when he recovered, a lady, you'd never imagine this happened, just came up to him. It's one of the assassination attempts. It's kind of like the assassination of John Lennon. Just stabbed him for no reason, and he missed his heart by 1/4 of an inch. What a moving speech he had when he said, I came 1/4 inch from losing my life. Their house was blown up. His daughter heard the news about her dad's death on television. It was a tumultuous moment in our history. But on that night before, he kind of prophesied. He did prophesy. He talked about his dream, and he said, I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that I've been to the mountaintop, using the metaphor that he used all along of the children of Israel who were coming out of slavery and moving towards the promised land. And it wasn't just for African Americans, it was for all Americans. We all needed to treat people with dignity, because if you treat someone without dignity, you can show yourself, there's no greater way to show yourself less dignity than to look down on someone or to treat someone with injustice. But everyone knew that it meant something for migrant workers. It meant something for Jewish and Muslim. It meant something for everyone that had any kind of a difference. As he championed this cause, and he said, I see that day. And I've been to the mountaintop, but I might not get to the promised land with you. Using the picture of Moses going up Mount Nebo, which is in modern-day Jordan, and you can look into the promised land, but he didn't get there. Joshua and Caleb and the younger generation got there, but he could see it. And it was taken from us with an assassin's bullet. His life was about a dream. He used that terminology a lot, didn't he? When there was the march in Washington, D.C., 1 million people gathered there. And he said, I have a dream. And it stirred in the hearts of everyone, people who disagreed with him and agreed with him. And he was cashing a check. He used that metaphor. That the founding fathers and their Christian heritage believed that all men and women, they didn't say it, but all men and women were created equal. We've got a long ways to go with that dream, don't we? In many ways. And it touched our world and changed our world, but it wasn't done. And he never saw it to completion. Once a year, I always get invited to go to Liberia to speak to their national conference of Christians, churches in Liberia. Liberia is a really interesting country, which I never heard of until I was invited to speak there. And they have, it was a country that was formed after the Civil War, and people that loved Abraham Lincoln's concept of democracy. And so they left America, former slaves, and they formed a democracy in West Africa based upon the principles, the highest principles that we had for our democracy. And it lasted clear to the 1950s when an outward country sponsored a coup. It was taken over by a dictator. When I spoke for the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo in Washington, D.C., when they had a reception for him, I didn't speak, I prayed. I had an hour with his staff, and I said, what's all the strife in West Africa about, in Central Africa? And they said, we've been blessed too much. We have too much natural resources. And so all the countries of the world sponsor all these revolutions that go on and all these civil wars that go on. In that time, Joseph Kabila, it was predicted, and I'm not endorsing him, but he had 4 vice presidents because he was the most, his life was the most dangerous in the world, according to Time magazine, because so many people wanted to kill him. And I never have been able to make it to Liberia because they keep getting Ebola and they cancel the conference off. But I hope to go there someday. Martin Luther King had a dream. It was a dream that was from God, because everyone that would hear about it knew that it was the way that it ought to be. And I can't imagine any racist that would kill children, commit genocide, whether it's in Central Africa or in Bosnia or in Turkey or in Iraq or Germany or any place else. The heart of hearts, we all know that there ought to be equality and opportunity, and that we ought to treat all human beings, whether they're different or not, with dignity. But we have a long ways to go, right? In doing that. And I'm telling you today, in this 4 weeks I have on trust, hoping that you'll trust God more and more, to trust the dream that God has given you. Now, the first week I talked about how it's biblical to trust. It's hard to trust because we were created to love. And when you try something and fail, it breaks you. The more caring you are, the more loving you are. When you reach out in love and you're rejected from that love, it hurts more the more loving you are. But you can't laugh without trust. Do you ever know someone that has a really weird laugh when they laugh and snort sometimes? We all have a funny laugh. You can see us laugh. There's no real dignified way to laugh. I guess there was, it would be humorous, and Elliot might make a videotape about it. When Elliot first started making the announcements on that, he said, I got an idea of making the announcements on video and being really silly. And I said, do it. He said, I'm afraid I might go too far. Elliot, you're that close. If he ever turns into Will Ferrell and tears off his clothes and starts running around in his underwear like Will Ferrell does in every movie, that's too far, right? You can't unsee that picture. To laugh takes trust, doesn't it? To tell a joke, well, it takes even more trust. Boy, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of telling a joke and it's not funny. I've had that experience. It's hard to get out of it. Or you forget the punchline. To love takes trust. You can't love without trust. You're putting yourself in your most vulnerable way. Even to go up to someone and say, I think we might be friends, and they're like, well, I don't like you at all. I think you stink. I think you're ugly. You're just the kind of person I don't like. That takes trust. It takes trust to march to the streets and say, we want to cash a check that was created by the founding fathers and claim the equality that there ought to be in this world. That takes trust. It takes trust to believe in a dream. It takes trust to believe in God. You're never going to figure it all out. It takes some trust, a step of trust. I believe that every one of you is a dream from God. The Bible says in Ephesians 1 and 2 that before the foundations of the world, that means before the Big Bang took place, 15 billion years ago or whatever, before all the matter in the universe condensed into one small atom, and God said, let there be light, and it exploded into the universe. Before that ever happened, God thought of you. The way you'd look, your sense of humor, and the dreams that you have. And he had this dream, and he had this wonderful dream, and he thought, who can I give this dream to? And he searched through all time and through all history. And he trusts you with the people that you're assigned to love. So he had someone like Carol. Carol, I'm sorry that I embarrass you every week, but he gave her 2 amazing children. And she's become an amazing wife for David and her children. And the singles ministry. He trusted all of that to someone that we love and know as Carol. And it's the same way with you. Every human being, there's no accidents. Every human being represents a dream. You don't know all the details of the dream, just like Martin Luther King Jr. didn't know all the details of the dream. He was smart enough to see time and history, the threats that was going on, and said, I'm probably not going to get there with you, but that's going to happen. I've seen the promised land. The dream's fragile. How can we trust dreams that change and we fail? Winston Churchill said, success is failing and not quitting, failing and not quitting, failing and not quitting. And that's the way we find success. No one gets a perfect layout of the dream. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't have a perfect layout of the dream. He made changes. If you study his philosophy, and I encourage you to, because so few people talk about, or so many people talk about it, so few people read what he had to say. He made changes. He was a very intelligent person. And we all make changes, but you have to trust the dream to take the step forward. Have you ever held a baby in your hands? What trust it is that God would trust a baby to you, to even hold it for a second. I've gone up to people before and say, wow, what a cute baby. Can I hold it? And they look at me and they're like, no. I think you might fumble. You might drop it. I think I'll hold on to it myself. What trust it is for a baby. God gives someone a baby. God gives someone a friend. And he trusts you with a mission for your life. My heart's very open today because it's broken. When our hearts are broken, they open. And this morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, a very good friend, Joanne Bath, known her for 33 years, passed on to heaven. I've been visiting her, and that was her prayer. She was wrestling with dementia, but it doesn't make it very, very easy for those of us that loved her. And it was very hard for her boyfriend, Ray, they've been married since they were teenagers. I had her dad's funeral. Her dad was a pastor. She grew up as a pastor's daughter and trusted Jesus Christ. Ray is a great psychiatrist and professor at the University of Washington. Half of his strength, I told him right in front of Joanne, came from Joanne. She's so down to earth. She loved her children and her grandchildren. I still know her grandchildren and go see them, even though they don't come to church very often. She sparkled when she talked about them. When I did her daughter's wedding, we had it at the Nordstrom's, and they had, I've never seen anything like this. They had Rolls-Royce golf carts for everyone. That's the one thing I remember. I don't remember anything I said. I just remember the Rolls-Royce golf carts. But she passed on to heaven. And they've always lived in beautiful homes, very successful, and they moved into a little apartment. And I went to visit them after they gave up their home, and Trilogy, which was a step down from their home in Bridal Trails, after they kind of wanted to downsize, and then they moved into an apartment, and they both said, we've lived in some beautiful homes through our lives. God's blessed us with a lot of things as we followed his plan, but this home is just temporary. We've got another home in heaven, and she knew that. She trusted that. And she's in heaven now, and our prayers are for her family and for Ray, how they were high school sweethearts. She was a big part of his medical practice. When I heard the news at 4 in the morning, I just thought, she used to call me one of her boys. She believed in me and the dream of building a great caring network 33 years ago. She stuck by us. She sparkled. She laughed at Ray's jokes. I think she was the only one that did. She used to giggle because they're teenagers. My jokes are not very funny, but Jackie and I have loved each other since we're teenagers, and our kids will often remark, the only one that likes your jokes, Dad, is Mom, because she's the only one that gets them. Joanne loved Ray's jokes. She was a masterpiece, a dream that was from God. Imperfect, but on a perfect trail. Trust the dream that God has loaned to you. Not that it's not going to change, and not that it's not going to have its difficulties and its hardships, because Martin Luther King Jr. had more than his fair share of hardships, didn't he? But he couldn't do anything else but follow the plan that God had for him. I've loved being a pastor. I can't do anything else but be a pastor. It's not that I'm not employable, because I am employable, but it's the call. I have to do it. I always tell people to write a book, don't write a book unless you have to write a book. It is so hard. Like the last book I wrote, and I sold it to a publisher, and they came back and let's change this book and make it about a dog. And I'm like, no, it's going to be just this dog book. And don't write a book unless you have to. And the dreams of your life, you have to follow. You speak about those ideals, and they mean something to you. And it starts at a very young age, and it starts at junior high or maybe even younger. You see things that should not be, and it seems like you are not powerful enough to do anything about it. And then you keep going to school, and people get behind you, and all of a sudden you realize you're the one walking out to face the giant, and you've got 5 smooth stones. You're the Martin Luther King Jr. Because every one of you, every human being is a dream from God. Trust the dream. Trust the dream, not that it's not going to change, not that it might be a little bit wrong sometimes. Trust the dream. Why? Because we trust God. But Martin Luther King couldn't sit in his church in a Sunday school class and hear about justice without doing something about justice. He had to believe the dream. He had to step forward in the dream. The same way with you. So the last part, last two verses, here it is. Because I'm committed to only speak for 20 minutes. That means I'm 3 minutes over time. Verse 8. But I am like an olive tree. Olive tree lives thousands of years. When you go to Israel and you pray in the Garden of Gethsemane, you might be praying on an olive tree that was there when Jesus was there. Trees live a long time. The redwood forest dates back before the time of Jesus. Even the little evergreens up above 10,000 feet, some of those are hundreds and hundreds of years old. Olive trees can live for thousands of years. This person says, after complaining about everything, I'm like an olive tree. Planted, flourishing, not just planted, flourishing in the house of God. And I trust God's unfailing love forever and ever. By the time I finish my life, I'm determined you're going to be a trusting person. You're not going to be able to resist it. I'm going to show you a love that you can't resist. I'm determined that you're going to know that you're going to heaven. And you won't be afraid. And the window of heaven, when it opens, you're going to know that you're going there. You're going to be able to trust Jesus Christ for that. It says, I trust in God's unfailing love. When? How long? Forever and ever. I will praise you forever for what you have done. In your name I will hope, for your name is good. I will praise in the presence of your saints. God's love never fails. Remember the dream that God had in mind with you. One last story. Some of you heard this before, but it was the hardest funeral I've ever done. I've done a lot of funerals in 44 years of being a pastor. I've done 8 weddings in one day, 3 weddings in 45 minutes. Not that I'm keeping records, but 3 weddings in 45 minutes. I've done 5 funerals in 1 week, is the most I've ever done. But I've done 3 funerals in one day and 2 weddings. That was quite a combination. And on that particular day, I went by when Green's owned all the funeral homes around. I saw Michael Green down in Kirkland, and I pulled up and I said, is this the place where it was a lady's name, this lady's wedding is going to take place? And he was worried about me just like you would worry about me for saying the wrong thing. He said, funeral, Pastor Tim, funeral, not wedding. Don't get the two mixed up. You look like you just came from a wedding, but this is a funeral. This is the hardest one I've ever done because many times you get calls to go visit the family and they tell me about the person. When I went to visit this family, I hadn't met any of these members of the family, but it was a lady who had gone through a very painful divorce. And her ex-husband was there, and he said, whatever you do, I don't want you to say anything good about my wife during this memorial service. That's hard parameters to do a memorial service. Her 3 grown children were there, and they were so hurt by this painful divorce, they said, yeah, don't say she went to heaven because we know she wasn't a Christian. Don't say anything good about her. It reminded me of the joke of the guy who's doing a funeral, and he's just waxing on about how great this guy was, and his wife's sitting in the front row, and she leans over to one of his kids and says, go over and look in that casket and see if your daddy's really in there. That's who he's talking about. See, one of those jokes that's not funny that you tell anyway. It was like that situation, and so they told me all these things. I'm taking notes, trying to find something good. Did you do this? No. Did you do that? No. Did you have any faith at all? No. Then after they went through, I spent about an hour going through there talking about grief, as I always do. The mom was there. The little old mom was there. And she said, no, I totally disagree. She was a Christian. She made some mistakes in her life. But after she was broken by a divorce, she went to a church. She found a church where Divorced people were welcome that had made mistakes. And she went through a program that helped her change, and she got involved in their singles group, and she prayed with the pastor in the prayer garden, and she accepted Christ, and she was a Christian. She taught Sunday school in that church. Totally different picture. Now, I have no evidence, except for I've got 2 stories. So as I walk in there on this busy day of weddings and funerals, I'm thinking, okay, who's got the right story? How do I handle this memorial service? And I handle tough ones in a positive way because I believe in faith and grace. But I went and I said, I heard a lot of information. I'm going to trust that the mama was right. She was sitting there. I said, here's what she told me about her daughter. And I told him all the good things. And I said, she made some mistakes in her life, but she found Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior. She prayed with the pastor that she could be forgiven. She got involved in the church, and she taught Sunday school, and got involved with the singles group and found a new family. And I believe that she's in heaven. As I said those words in the emotion of the moment, and I've seen this before, the ex-husband started to agree with me. And the grown children started to agree with me. And some of the negative thoughts started going out, and some of the positive memories started coming in. And they thanked me for the service as the mom came up and thanked me for believing her. But I'd come into the Green's funeral home through the side, in Michael Green's office, and I came in through the side. I didn't come in through the front way. And as I walked out, I went and saw all the pictures of the lady that had died at a young age from cancer. And I knew her. She went to our church. I was the pastor that she prayed with to accept Jesus Christ. She taught Sunday school in our church. We hadn't seen her in a long time because we didn't know she had cancer. And we didn't know why she disappeared for such a long time. But the mama was right. Now, inside of you, you have those 2 voices pushing all the time. And I want you to learn to trust God. He's right. Trust the dreams that He has for you.